Really excited to share with you my interview with Julie Ryan. She is a very successful businesswoman with a 45-year career in medical devices. Anyway, 30 years ago, she started getting into energy woo-woo medicine and found that she is an amazing psychic and medical intuitive. I can't wait to share this interview with you. Hey, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Next Level Healing. I'm your host, Dr. Tara Perry. My guest today is Julie Ryan. She is a fascinating mix of Newtonian 3D reality, meeting psychic mediumship, and medical intuition. During her 45-year career, she invented and manufactured surgical devices that are sold throughout the world and founded 9 companies in 5 different industries. Julie is a businesswoman, an inventor, an author, a podcaster, and a serial entrepreneur. More than 30 years ago, Julie learned the basics of energy work and now functions as a psychic medium and medical intuitive. Welcome to Next Level Healing, Julie Ryan.
Thank you so much. What a delight to be here with you. You're like the queen of all of this stuff.
You are so sweet. Well, I am so impressed with your background. And my whole life, like ever since I read Seed of the Soul and Dancing Woolly Masters, it's like, wow, it's so cool to see how the 3D reality and the more than 3D reality are doing this. And people are waking up to the idea that our thoughts are real and consciousness pervades everything. How did you go from being in the 3D science world to realizing, wait a minute, there's more here?
Well, I had a friend who gave me a book called Anatomy of the Spirit by Carolyn Mays. And she called herself a medical intuitive. And this was more than 30 years ago, around 30 years ago. And I thought, well, what the heck is that? I'd never heard that term before. And I wanted to know more. Back then, we didn't have the internet yet. So I did the old-fashioned thing and I went to a bookstore. And then I found a book called Hands of Light by Barbara Brennan. And the late Dr. Brennan was a NASA physicist who parlayed very complex quantum physics principles into understandable English for the non-scientific mind. That would be me. And I wanted to know more. I read her book and I wanted to know more. And I called her school and I said, do you guys have anybody teaching this stuff in my area? And sure enough, they did. And so I studied with my mentor for 6 years and did 3 years of energy healing and 3 years of Kabbalistic healing, ancient Jewish mysticism. For a good Catholic girl like me, that was fun. And, it's all the same thing. It's all source. It's all God. And fast forward 30 years, and now I teach this stuff in a weekend to people from all over the world. Everybody can do it. Everybody's doing it now. They just don't realize they're doing it.
I love how you say that. Yeah, those were 2 of the big pioneers, Carolyn Meese and Barbara Brennan. So what were take us back to a scene where something happened and your brain just kind of went, oh, reality's not what I thought it was.
Oh, gosh. Well, I didn't have dead people chasing me as a child, or if I did, I didn't know it, let alone what I would have done with that information. But I think the Catholics do a really good job of getting the children to understand that there's more to life. You've got saints and angels and the Holy Spirit and things like that. So it gives us a platform from which to launch into this spiritual realm. And when I started studying the energy healing, which is what brought me in first, and then what I realized is once you connect with spirit, you can do it all. So I call myself a buffet of psychicness.
I love that, by the way.
Yeah,
your
because
trademark buffet of psychicness.
I know it. Well, in every industry, you got things that are siloed. You got the healers and the psychics and the mediums and the pet psychics and the NDEers. Connect with spirit, it's all the same thing. And we all are doing it. Everybody has the ability. So when I first started receiving information from spirit, and I was seeing visuals in my head and I could see inside people's bodies. I'm like a human MRI. I thought, oh, all right, this is interesting. And as an inventor of orthopedic surgery devices sold throughout the world, I knew a little bit about that, but I had to go out and buy an anatomy book because I'd see body parts and I'd hear in my head what it was, but I wanted to see a visual of really what it looked like in an anatomy book. And so I had to go back and re-educate myself on things that I probably learned in the 5th grade and had long forgotten.
So Carolyn Meese had her MD that she was sort of working with. How did you, what milieu did you interact with people where you were evaluating their bodies?
Hey guys, studies are showing that 68% of people that watch podcasts regularly don't click the subscribe button. Do me a huge favor. If you like this content, click subscribe so other people know where to go for the cool stuff. Thank you.
Well, for the first 20 some years, it was just friends and family.
Mhm.
And then when I sold my surgical device manufacturing company in 2015, I thought, okay, now what? And there's a whole story that goes with that I'll be happy to share of how I got into this. And now I do it full time. So I probably, between my call-in show, which is Thursday nights at 8 Eastern, Ask Julie Ryan, people call in from all over the world and I scan them. Like, I could find you if you're in a galaxy far, far away. Doesn't matter. It's all remote. And so what I do now is I'll probably scan upwards of 3,000 people in a year between my show and my clients and my lives and my training.
Wow, that's a lot of scan.
Yeah. So it's just second nature. And I'm like a human MRI or a CT scan or an X-ray. I can see broken bones, torn ligaments, viral infections, bacterial infections, cancer, metastasized cancer, things like that. I worked with a woman this morning. It was interesting. And she didn't tell me that she was having any symptoms, but I looked at her lungs and I said, did you have bronchitis or pneumonia in your life? And she was in her mid-70s at this point, like maybe even as a kid. And she said, I don't remember having it. And I said, well, you've got a bunch of scar tissue, especially in your left lung. I said, it looks like spider web material, but it's thicker and it's tethering your lungs so your lung can't expand all the way. So spirit works through me and with me to help that person heal themselves. So we're cutting out scar tissue in her lungs. And this is all, I'm watching all this healing in my head. And I was describing it to her and she said, well, that makes total sense because I live in the mountains of Colorado and I hike a lot. And there are times, many times when I hike, especially when I get up to the higher altitudes, it feels like my lungs won't expand to let more air in. And she said, I just thought it had something to do with the height. And I said, I bet it works better for you now than when you go hiking, because I could see that. So that's just an example that happened an hour ago.
No, that was great. I love that. With 3,000 a year, I'm sure you're loaded with those stories.
Oh,
well, yeah. What are some this last year? What have been some of the most amazing ones that you did this, energy healing and something shifted from being there and a medical problem to not being a medical problem anymore?
Oh gosh, to your point, I have thousands of stories like that. And the most amazing thing to me is there are two, really. One is when we get a diagnosis, if you will, something's identified, let's call it that. And it's something that the physicians and the other practitioners have missed. People come to me, and I have 6 graduates that work with me now too, and work with my clients. And usually you can get in to see them faster and they're less expensive than I am. So I always tell people, go talk to one of my graduates if you want. But these people have been to multiple doctors, gotten multiple diagnoses, multiple treatment plans, and nothing's working. So they're coming to me kind of as a last resort. And I'm saying, all right, you got mold. You're full of mold. Where's the mold? And they'll say, well, I don't know. And I'll say, well, do you have a water leak in your home? Well, I did, but we fixed it. Well, then we'll look inside the walls and we can see where all the mold is. There's something there. I had a guy a couple of weeks ago where he had all kinds of neurological issues, and I was getting a lot of toxic exposure. He was in a wheelchair. A lot of the time he could stand for a couple of minutes at a time. So I got him on my radar. So that means I got a hologram of him in my mind's eye, and I'm looking inside his body. And I said, my God, I said, you look like you're filled with pond scum. It was this greenish, brownish, toxic stuff. And I said, this is environmental toxins. Do you live near a manufacturing plant? And he said, yes, I do. I live on the Mississippi River and there's a plant 10 miles upstream.
Mm.
And I said, all right, are you by any chance using well water as your water source? And he said, yes, we are. I said, how long have you lived there? He said, a long time. And so that's what was going on. So then we can reverse engineer what the cause is, and at the same time do the healing energetically, which will integrate into his body. And then I get what I call divine downloads too, with spirit telling me, okay, have him do this, this, and this from the physical side to help the healing integrate. So the work that I do, like you, we're all helping somebody heal themselves, and it's all part of the healing equation. Eastern medicine, Western medicine, energy medicine, complementary medicine. It's all part of that puzzle of what that person can really access to heal themselves.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. And you also work with animals. How do animals show up differently than humans when you're scanning them or communicating with them?
Not that different, except when they're dying. And that's a whole nother conversation we can get into if you want. But same thing. I see body parts, and it's so fun when I tell the animals' parents or owners, or whatever we call them. My daughter-in-law is a veterinarian, Dr. Mal, in LA. And she calls the owners their humans. She'll say, my humans. And then the pets are her patients. Yeah, I was talking to one of my humans. So cute. Anyways, I will get the information exactly like with a human scan, but I'll say, okay, this and this and this, when you take them into the vet, this is what you want to talk about. I have a client who has horses, and one of her horses was lame, and she called me and she goes, okay, check Trigger, see what's going on with Trigger. I said, okay, I don't remember his name. And so I said, it's his back left knee. Back right knee, excuse me. And I said, he's kind of like a torn meniscus. And I didn't know what that was called in horse language, but that's what it looked like to me. She lives in North Carolina, so she took him to UNC vet school or North Carolina State, whichever one is there. And she said, he's got a torn, whatever, meniscus kind of thing, horse language. And the vet looked at her like, yeah, sure, lady. And they did x-rays, and sure enough, that's exactly what happened. And she said, you just need to scope him and fix it like a torn meniscus in a human. And so they came back and they said, that was a really good guess. And she said, I just laughed because I didn't want to go down the rabbit hole of, I talked to a medical intuitive psychic woman who told me what was going on.
Actually, I used an animal communicator when my cat was sick a couple of years ago, I think 3 years ago, and she was spot on. And the advice she gave me was beyond what the vets had given me.
Yeah,
the vets went nowhere, literally nowhere.
Well, the thing that's so funny about animals is most of them tell me they want more treats. It's like universal. It's been so funny over the years because the owners will be giving them some fancy schmancy food they get from the vet that's very expensive. And the cat just wants little Friskies. No. Or they want some cheap store brand.
Oh, that's so disheartening. I feel badly enough with like contaminants in the human food supply. I think it's 10 times worse than the animal, maybe 10 times worse than
there's this one cat that comes to mind, and its name was Tippy, and Tippy was like 25 or something, and Tippy looked like she was dying. And so we talked to Tippy. Tippy wasn't eating. She looked like she was on her way out. And I asked Tippy, I said, Tippy, do you want to stick around for a while? And she said, yeah. And I said, what do you need? And she said, just get me some good food. And I said, like what? And she said, little Friskies.
Oh, please. Oh my God.
Honest to God. And her owner said, little Friskies? They'll not have a bunch of junk in it. And I said, she wants little Friskies. I mean, what the heck? You don't have anything to lose. They went and got the cat little Friskies. She lived for another year and a half.
Oh, dear Lord. That's hilarious.
And they'll tell us whether they want to be euthanized or not.
I'm really interested in how animals and humans are different at the point of death.
Yeah, they'll tell me. I have a lot of people call into my show and they'll say, Fluffy's looks like they're on their last leg. And when a human and an animal is dying, the spirit is attached to the body and it looks like a bubble. Think of a cartoon speech bubble where the words or the thoughts of the character in the cartoon are. And so that's how I can tell if somebody's dying. That's the first phase in the human, what I call the 12 phases of transition. That's all I see with the animals. So I'll be able to tell whether an animal's dying or not. And then communicate with them telepathically, the animal. And I'll say, what do you need? Are you in pain? Do you want to be euthanized? And they'll tell me whether they want to be euthanized or not.
So carrying that over into the human realm, I mean, do you find humans that, just they don't want heroic measures, bringing them back? Some people formally sign NDEs. Do you find that with humans as well, that there's just a point in time where it's like, okay, I know it's my time to go. Please let me go.
Yeah, all the time. Yes. I always ask when a human is dying, I always ask 3 questions. Are you ready to go? Are you in pain? What do you need? And what do you need can range from a chocolate bar or a sweater or a book, or one of my favorites, my neighbor called and her elderly grandmother was dying and she had Alzheimer's and had not communicated in years. And she telepathically told me she wanted them to get her missal and to sing to her. And my friend said, what's a missal? I said, like a prayer book, like an old-fashioned prayer book. That's what they used to call them. She said, well, I have no idea where it is. And Grandma's saying, I want the red one. And my friend's going, I have no clue where to look because they're out of state with Grandma at the nursing home where she's dying. So Grandma says, it's in my table next to my bed. It's in the nightstand on the right side of my bed. It's the red one. Bring it. So they bring it and they all start singing Amazing Grace. Now, this woman had not spoken in like 7 or 8 years. She sang Amazing Grace with the family. I have goosebumps telling you this.
Yeah, I'm getting goosebumps too.
And died like within an hour.
Wow.
She spoke the words and she sang that song and then she passed. I mean, how beautiful is that?
Unbelievably beautiful. Yeah. How often does the what do you need include closure with somebody that they haven't wrapped things up with?
Sometimes not as much with the person who's dying, more with the person who is going to be living, wants to straighten out whatever's crossways with the person before they pass. And the stories about somebody waiting for another person to arrive are endless. And every critical care practitioner, every hospice worker, every ER doctor and medical provider has endless stories about that. So do the funeral directors, because when the families come in to plan the funeral, they hear the stories of what happened at the end. So it's very sweet. One of my favorite stories, I have a client who's a ICU nurse, and she told me, she said she had this patient and he flatlined. And so he was on his way out and he had a DNR, do not resuscitate, easy for me to say. And she said he flatlined and she said, I shook him really hard. And I said, no, you can't leave yet because your brother's on the way here from the airport. You have to wait till he gets here. And the guy came back and his heart rate came back and he waited for his brother. And then he died like within an hour or so of his brother arriving.
Oh my goodness.
That's one of my favorite stories. Those are endless. And the thing that's so amazing when we're dying, every human, I don't see this with animals, but I see it with every human, regardless of how they die. If they die instantly, like in the case of a homicide or suicide, or die over a prolonged period of time, days, weeks, months, even years, we're all surrounded by angels and the spirits of deceased loved ones and pets as we're transitioning. And there's university-based research that validates that says that 90% of people at the end of their lives do see the spirits of deceased loved ones and pets. We thought grandma all along was hallucinating from the morphine that hospice was giving her. She's not. She's actually seeing and communicating with her mother, who perhaps has been gone for 40 years.
Tell us about your book, Angelic Attendants. I know you're offering it to our listeners for free. I'm so excited.
For free. I always feel like a game show hostess, and I hold it up. Angelic Attendants, yeah.
What inspired you to write it? What kind of feedback are you getting from it? What are the biggest surprises that have come through the process of writing that book?
Fun story on that. Anybody that wants a free copy, we'll send you a free digital and audiobook, and we have it in Spanish too. If you prefer Spanish, just go to julieryangift.com, julieryangift.com, and we'll send you a free download. I think this stuff should be taught in the schools. There's lots of information out there about the afterlife. Lots of information about near-death experiences and how to grieve, but not much about what happens when we're actually dying. And the first time I saw all of this was when my own mother was dying in 2002. And I felt like the Lady of Justice statue, the Balance Act. Because on one side, my heart was breaking. My mother was dying very unexpectedly. We drove through the night to get to her. And on the other side, I was watching all this glorious spiritual stuff unfold. And I thought, whoa, what is this? Because I'd been studying woo-woo for about 10 years, but I'd never been around anybody who was dying before. That was the first time that had ever happened. And woo, by the way, means source in Taoism. I'm sure you probably know that.
I did not know that.
Yeah. Woo means source. So, and I love the word woo-woo because it's fun. We're supposed to have fun when we're doing this stuff because fun's joy, love. It's on my back.
Oh my God, let's stop.
Yeah.
You know, it's so many times when I ask people the question, what would you go back and say to the earlier version of you? You know, lighten up.
Lighten up, Francis, right? So how this all came about was I saw this with my mother, and at the end of every Roman Catholic funeral is a prayer that's either said or sung called In Paradisum. And it talks about how the angels and your loved ones will greet you and lead you into paradise. Well, I had just witnessed that happen with my mother. And I thought, whoa, there's really something here. And then I had seen it several times over the years. And then one day I was with my mentor several years later, and she was doing a healing on me. And when that's happening, my loved ones' spirits are on either side of the table, and they're participating in the healing, and I can see them. Even my late dog, Katie, has her little paws up on the table, and she's on her hind legs, her little spirit. So one day this spirit of a dead pope shows up. And he's got his Pope hat on and his shepherd's rod and the whole 9 yards. And I said, well, who are you? And he said, I'm Clement. And I said, oh, well, I'm so sorry. I went through 12 years of Catholic schools, but I've never heard of a Pope Clement. And he laughed and he said, well, I was number 6. And I said, great. How may I help you? Kind of like, why are you here? And he said, you're supposed to teach the world what happens when somebody dies because everybody's so afraid. There's nothing to be afraid of. And you know that. And he said, it's been bastardized throughout the millennia. And you just need to teach the world what happens when somebody dies. And I said, thank you so much for the offer. But you see, I'm a businesswoman. And if I do that, people will think I'm nuts. So I'm really not interested. But thank you for stopping by. And he laughed again and he said, no. Everything you've done in your career is to prepare you for this. So you just need to get on with it. And I said, again, thank you so much, but I'm really not interested. So a few minutes later, I get ready to leave. I'm in my car before I head home and I'm looking on my phone, Pope Clement VI. Looked him up. He was in office during the Black Plague when 2/3 of Europe died. And he's best known for his prayers for the dying and his prayers for the dead. And I thought, okay, Ryan, you can't make that up. So 2 more quick parts to this story. So
take your time. I'm loving it.
Couple years go by. I'm busy. I'm a mom. I'm a wife. I'm a businesswoman. I'm doing my thing. And I'm sitting in church on a Sunday morning, and the priest during his sermon says, wouldn't it be nice if somebody could really tell us if the angels and our loved ones greet us and lead us into paradise? And I'm getting elbowed from my husband and my son on either side of me. And I'm thinking, really, God, you're giving me grief about this from the pulpit on Sunday morning? really? Okay. So I wrote angelic attendants and I thought, I'm just going to get nailed. I mean, when this book comes out, it's going to affect my businesses. But all right, I'll do it. So go ahead, put the website up, release the book. A couple months later, I'm lecturing at a business conference, C-suite executives, mostly men. And this man at the end of my talk comes up and he's got his iPad open to askjulieryan.com. And I'm thinking, oh, here we go. And he said, is this you? And, of course, my pictures, on the homepage. I said, why, yes, it is. And I'm thinking, oh, get ready. And he said, I'm really interested in knowing more. Can we sit together at lunch? And I smiled and I said, sure, I'd love that. And inside I'm thinking, great, I'll get pummeled for an hour, at lunch. So we sit at this table of 8 people. It is 7 C-suite guys and me. All they wanted to talk about was woo-woo. They didn't want to talk about the conference. They didn't want to talk about their companies. They didn't want to talk about any business stuff. They didn't want to talk about what I had spoken about. They only wanted to talk about spiritual stuff. And so I said, okay, God, I'm in. And it was kind of like I needed that validation to know, okay, everything's going to be all right. And then shortly thereafter, I sold my surgical device manufacturing company. And here I am doing this full time. Never in a million years would have ever thought this, even to the point where when I was studying this stuff, family and friends said, why are you doing that? I said, I don't know. I said, what are you going to do with it? Again, no clue. It's just interesting. And now I can see how I was being led.
I can totally relate to that.
Yeah.
I don't feel like I've made decisions along the way.
Right.
You get really curious and passionate about something and, you have endless energy for studying what you're passionate about and no energy for the things that you really don't want to be doing.
Oh, no.
So, just give us a commentary on how you've seen things change in the last decades, because decades ago, a lot of people weren't talking about this, even if they had an amazing experience, like a shared death experience with a loved one, or people that had passed, talking to them. There was a lot of reticence to say anything because it didn't always end well for people that came out of the closet about stuff like that.
Right.
But it's really changed nowadays.
Yeah.
Thank God.
Well, a couple of things. First of all, there are several nuances about the 12 phases of transition that's been verified with research and data, and I can talk about those in a minute. But I think overall, the old guard, my parents, my grandparents, perhaps, I think my great-grandparents saw all this stuff. And it's been in the last 150 years or so where we've become more well-educated and proof-based that we want to see validation that this stuff's really happening in order to believe it. Whereas people before, they weren't as well-educated and they were more open to the spiritual things that everybody witnesses, but most people deny in this day and age. So I think a lot of those people that were reticent to believe this are dying off, quite frankly. And the younger people haven't been subjected to the fire and brimstone of religion and other cultures. All the civilizations and cultures have talked about angels and spirits and the ancient ones and all of that since the beginning of time. The zeitgeist is changing. People are more interested. I think people are becoming more spiritual. And I think that it's been my experience that the organized religions, in order for them to really keep their flock coming in, they've had to adapt some. I live in the deep South. You're in the South too now. And very rarely, but there have been a couple of times over the years where I had somebody say, well, this is evil. No, there's nothing evil about it. All spirits are pure love. Everybody goes to heaven. No, this is evil. If you talk to spirits, that's evil. I'll say, well, first of all, Pope Francis in 2016 issued a papal bulletin that said for his pastors to welcome healers and psychics because they are doing the work of the Holy Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's a pretty big religious figure saying that. Number one. Number two, when somebody says to me, talking to spirits is evil, I say, well, it's all throughout all the holy texts. and in ancient literature, classical literature too. And I'll say, well, let me ask you something. And I'll have their attention and I'll say, do you pray? And they'll say, of course I pray. I pray every day, all day long. I go, great. To whom are you praying? And let's say they'll say Jesus. I say, okay, are your prayers ever answered? They'll say, yeah, all the time. And I'll say, all right, so let me get this straight. You're talking to Jesus in your prayers. You're sitting on your living room couch and Jesus is sitting next to you and you can hold his hand while you're talking to him. And they'll say, no. I say, oh, you're talking to Jesus' spirit. And you can just see the light bulbs go off in their head. And I go, oh, I never thought about it that way. I said, we all talk to spirits all day long. We just don't think of it that way. But that's where our guidance comes from. That's where our intuition comes from. That's where our ideas come from. And so it'll change their way of thinking, sometimes just for a few seconds, but we've planted that seed and then it grows from there.
Love it. That's terrific. I love when there's something so obvious and it's right in front of you and all you have to do is sort of connect the dots and watch for the reaction. What are a couple of the top studies? I know obviously University of Virginia has done lots of work in this field, but what are a couple of the studies that were the most mind-blowing for you to really help show the world that, oh my goodness, something's going on here?
I don't know that they were mind-blowing. They were validating for me. And I like to say I love it when science catches up with woo-woo because woo-woo's been around a whole lot longer. My favorite, of course, goes with the 12 phases of transition, and that was the University of Buffalo. Dr. Chris Kerr, Kerr, MD, PhD. He did a study that showed that 90% of people see the spirits of deceased loved ones and pets as they're transitioning. And there really hadn't been much, really any research done on that. And he's a director of a huge hospice organization. And I've done clinical studies for my surgical devices to get them approved to be sold in the U.S. and other countries. And getting a clinical study done or any kind of a research project is a big deal. I mean, that's a big deal. So I did mine at Indiana University and University of Pittsburgh. And so I said to Dr. Kerr, when I had him on my show, I said, okay, how'd you get that through the IRB, the Institutional Review Board, which is the governing body that decides whether a research project is going to be funded and be able to move forward? And he laughed. He said, nobody's ever asked me that. And I said, well, I've done them, so it's hard. And I said, I would have loved to have been a fly in the wall on that conversation. And so that's really, I think, been so hugely validating. Another thing that cracks me up, because I have patents on my surgical devices, and I know how hard it is to get a patent approved, both domestically here in the U.S. and then international patents. The thing that cracks me up the most is the Ouija board is patented.
No way.
Yeah, way. The Ouija board was the best-selling game in the history of games. Milton Bradley, like forever, every home had one. And then when it became evil was because it was used in the Exorcist movie. And that's when it became evil. But the Ouija board is patented. Wouldn't you have loved to have been in that meeting?
What year was that done?
It was early, like the 30s or something,
Wow.
1930s. But wouldn't you have loved to have been in that meeting with the patent examiner? You know, what happened? That I haven't researched it, but I'm going to do that one day. And I think, can you imagine what convinced that patent examiner to say, okay, yeah, this is real?
Well, it's also bizarre to think that one person, I mean, hasn't that device been around for hundreds of years?
Yeah, it's been around a long time.
So how does somebody, that would be like patenting divining rods or something. How on earth does a person get to patent it?
Well, I think because it came up with the game and it was the technique that was being used to,
Gotcha.
To talk with spirit. I remember using them at slumber parties when I was a kid. We never could get anybody to talk to us, any spirits. And we'd try and get one of our girlfriends to levitate, usually the smallest, skinniest, lightest weight one. Did you ever do that?
Yeah,
You
all
put
that stuff.
two fingers under them and try and get them to levitate. I've talked to people who've been able to do that. I was never part of that, which is funny because I didn't know anything about woo-woo war, nor was I interested in it. It was just a slumber party game. Usually we would play that after we'd watch scary movies. There was a movie series on Friday nights in Columbus, Ohio, when I was growing up called Chiller Theater. And it was the old black and white horror movies,
I remember it. I
the
remember it.
zombies and all of that.
Killer.
That's right.
What are some of the myths that you feel like still exist to this day that you like to dispel?
Well, everybody goes to heaven. That's the truth that, oh, he's going to burn for eternity. Well, that's a role that somebody's playing in a lifetime. It's always the mother spirit that runs the show from the spirit world when somebody's dying, the mother that raised the person who's dying, whether that be the birth mother or an adopted mother, or perhaps a grandmother or an aunt. It's the woman who raised them. That surprised me. I thought when people were dying, God probably had like a death and dying department, and he'd say, okay, Susie May's dying in Mississippi, send out some angels to help her. Well, it's the maternal spirit that brings in the angels and the spirits of deceased loved ones and pets. Yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah, so that's interesting. And I'll have women sometimes, it's usually women will say, my mother's the last person I want at my bedside when I'm dying, in spirit form or any other way. She was awful.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll say, well, that was a role she was playing in that lifetime. And when you see her spirit in heaven, you can take her an Oscar statue and say, Mom, you deserved an Academy Award for that role because you were horrible. And when we think about interviews with famous actors and actresses, their favorite roles are always the bad guy because they're so nuanced, always. So that's interesting. Everybody goes to heaven. That's a stretch for for most people that are raised in the Judeo-Christian culture, because it goes against, what we've all been taught.
And if you were to explain why we're doing this crazy play in the first place, what would your answer to that be?
Well, we're here to create. We're here to experience. We're here to create. And we need to have the bad in order to know what we don't like. And that helps us create what we do. If everything was all hunky all the time and we were just, walking around happy, we wouldn't have any incentive to create anything because we would be happy with things the way they were or the way they are. What I've heard from spirit a bazillion times is that there's no right or wrong in the spirit world. It's just an experience. We look at something from our human perspective as right and wrong, and we need to, because if we were going around killing everybody, we wouldn't be able to have the human experience, and that's why we're here. We're spirits having a human experience. The highs, the lows, the ups, the downs, and our spirit guides, our loved ones in heaven, our angels, the whole group, they're watching going, oh, wow, that's awful for Sam, but what's Sam going to create out of that? How's Sam going to get out of this bind? What's he going to come up with? And then as we create things, then it benefits everybody who's ever going to live, because it all goes into the human consciousness, the consciousness field of energy. And every experience is a one-time event, because it's the only time you and I are going to be talking about this at this moment in time. It will never happen again. So our experiences together and everybody listening will go into the collective consciousness, and then we can access any of that information whenever we want just by thinking about it. And that's how somebody like me with a communications degree is an inventor of surgical devices sold throughout the world.
I love that.
Yeah.
So if you could go back and talk to 10-year-old Julie for 2 minutes, what would you say?
Have fun. Yeah. Be open for the adventure, which I have been. Trust that the people that you need and the circumstances that you need will show up exactly when you need them. And they always do in every situation. And if it doesn't feel good when you're doing something, that just means it's not over. the experience isn't over. People will say, well, God, that was awful going through that. But now I look back at it and I see how it was really beneficial. So
That's really key, isn't it? Because
yeah,
it never feels right or welcomed or sometimes even survivable when we're in the middle of it. But when we look back on it, it suddenly makes sense.
if you don't feel good yet, it's not over. Trust the people you need are going to show up. Trust the circumstances you need are going to be there right when you need them. Ask for help. Ask your deceased loved ones, spirits in heaven. Ask your angels. Ask God. Ask whoever, saints, whatever. Just ask them for help. They're all there, willing to help, ready to help. They're not going to interfere, but boy, you ask them for help, they are Johnny on the spot.
So doesn't this go back to the quantum physics truth that everything is present all at once and there's no such thing as time and space?
Yeah. Yeah. And that, I don't really understand the physics of how that works. So for my brain, what I say is it feasible? Yeah. Do I understand it? No. Well, I understand it when I get back to heaven. Yeah. And it appeases me in the short run. The physics people, especially the quantum physicists, they have a much better understanding of how all this works. I just know that time isn't a thing in the spirit world. Time's a human condition that humans have put together, humans invented it really. And we need it for our human experience. But yeah.
Last question, and you may have already answered it. If you had a megaphone and the whole world was listening for a minute, what would you say?
Everybody's intuitive. Everybody has this ability. It's just a matter of developing and enhancing it. We've all had times when we thought of somebody and they called us or we ran into them or they texted us or they emailed us. And we said, oh, what a coincidence. I was just thinking of you. Well, no coincidence there. That's your intuition. We've all healed a child when they fall down and skin their knee and we kiss their boo-boo and send them back out to play and they're happy again. That's healing. And everybody goes to heaven.
Love that. And if somebody suspects that they have psychic ability, first of all, other than yourself, who are 3 people that you would recommend they learn from? And then I want to hear all about how people can stay in touch with you.
Oh, wow. Who can people learn from? Depending on what they want to learn. If they want to learn mediumship, Suzanne Giesman is a dear friend.
I love her.
Wonderful. Yeah. Marie Manasheri for medical is very, very good. I like her a lot too. For that would be the medical in that. Gosh, there's so many. I'm trying to think of Sun Chang, who is a Taoist priest, S-A-N, and Ching is spelled Q-I-N-G. He's a Taoist master. He's amazing for all of this. And I think the big thing is, and this is what I offer that I don't think anybody else really does, Sun Ching does, is once you connect with spirit, you can do it all. It doesn't need to be segmented. So, if you only have an interest in one area, the others are going to bleed in. But for me, I teach it all in a weekend. You're going to be able to do medical. You're going to be able to communicate with spirit, tell how close to death somebody is, pets, past lives, remote viewing, talk to any spirit, whether it's attached to a body or not.
Fantastic. So tell us your website and if you want, give us some more details about this weekend.
So AskJulieRyan.com is where everything is. We're at Ask Julie Ryan on all the socials. Ask Julie Ryan on YouTube. We've got 5 channels in 5 languages: English, Spanish, Portuguese, French, and German.
Fantastic.
And everything's at Ask Julie Ryan. Easy to find. And I teach the class live in the spring online, and then we do a live in-person one in the fall in Atlanta, and that's all at Ask Julie Ryan. And then I have 2 self-paced trainings that are available online, and those modules you do on your own. But all of my trainings have live practice groups, and I find that's really the key, because the more you do it, then it just becomes second nature, number one. And number two, once you get validation for what you're getting from the live practice groups, it really helps you trust what you're getting, and then you're off to the races.
Actually, I do have one more question.
Yeah.
So somebody's struggling with a mental emotional issue. You talked about the medical intuitive thing, a lot of bones and organs and stuff like that. Are you able to see things in their aura that have to do with mental emotional stuff and help them with that as well? I'm guessing yes.
Yes, and that is the root cause of every kind of medical condition. There's always a breach in what I call the energy field membrane, which is the container that holds the energy that makes up the body and the spirit. Think of it as like a big plastic bag that's holding that energy. When there's a tear or hole in it, it's caused by an energy block. Your line of work, acupressure, acupuncture, clear the block, get the chi to move. And those energy blocks are all caused by an emotional event, either in this life or a past life. So I'll go into that tear or hole and be shown a scene, and we'll get where it was, when it was, what happened. As soon as we illuminate it, it eradicates it. The energy filled membrane heals. The body goes back to working on full power, helps the body regain and maintain health. It's the most important part of the healing.
I agree. I found that going into the subconscious mind and finding those tears and blocks and beliefs that are way outdated, that you can't even see anymore because they're below the level of consciousness, and rewiring those is immensely powerful to helping somebody restore health.
Well, we can fix body parts all day long, but if you're like in power, what's the point?
I couldn't agree more. Julie, it has been such an honor and a pleasure having you here today. Folks, share this with anybody that you know that could use this information. Like and subscribe, and we will see you on the next episode of Next Level Healing. This podcast is intended for the purpose of providing information and education. It does not provide advice and is not meant to be used for any self-diagnosis or the replacement of any kind of licensed professional. The creators and individuals appearing here do not endorse any specific tests, positions, medications, products, or procedures. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent.